Welcome back to the Faith Ventures podcast. I'm Dr. Norman Horn, and with me today is a very special guest, one of the founders of Pray.com, Mr. Matthew Potter. Matthew, welcome to the show. This is so awesome to have you here. I am so excited to talk to you about Pray.com and your mission, what you guys have been doing, and you're just doing such exciting stuff. I hope that you're excited as well. We want to launch right into it, man.
Hey, Norman, honored and blessed to be here on the Faith Ventures podcast and to speak to your listeners. And it's been a podcast I've listened to in the past, and I'm super excited to be on the show. So
awesome. Well, I'm so happy to hear that. We get all sorts of great people to come on and talk about the way in which they've integrated faith in their business. This is a pretty distinctly faith-centered business. And so I'm just so excited because I've used things like Headspace and Calm and whatnot. And there's some of those integrated aspects here and things that are similar, but also things that are different. We're going to talk about technology in the church. We're going to talk about the ways you've approached that. Dude, this is awesome. So first off, though, we got to learn a little bit about you. So tell us a little bit about your career journey and kind of how did you become the Matthew Potter of today? What are some of the big highlights that you want people to know about you?
Yeah. So, Norman, for me, it all started with a 15-year-old girl who was walking.
Usually begins with the girl.
15-year-old girl walking down the street, pregnant, going to an abortion clinic. And actually, on her way to that abortion clinic, she happened to spot a church in the distance and walked into that church to talk to the pastor about some advice on the biggest decision she was going to make in her life up to that point, because she was 15, she was pregnant. And the pastor was a brand new pastor. He was a little nervous to talk to the girl. So he actually called a buddy of his who planted a 20-person church in Los Angeles and said, hey, what should I tell this 15-year-old girl who just walked into my church? Her parents aren't here. I've never met her before. She's pregnant and she's asking me what she should do. And so the pastor in Los Angeles said, you know what? It's providence that you just called me. I am actually counseling this Christian couple who's been married for 10 years and haven't been able to have children. And doctors just told them that they'll never be able to have children. Why don't you walk back in there, ask that girl if she'd be willing to give her baby up for adoption? And so I was the baby the girl brought into the church, and I got adopted because of these two pastors that were friends. So that's how my life started off.
Wow.
My dad became the head elder of this little 20-person church and helped the pastor grow it to one of the largest churches in Los Angeles. And so I grew up in church with my pastor being like a second dad to me, and his daughter being my best friend. Ended up going to high school out here in Southern California, and super unique opportunity. I got invited to go to Pixar, and I got to meet Steve Jobs when I was at Pixar. And, being an adopted kind of loner, introverted kid as I was, I loved playing with computers. I loved taking things apart and just getting to meet Steve Jobs, who was a super inspirational guy. But when I went back home, I didn't realize that Steve Jobs was also adopted. And so it gave me someone to look up to who had similar passions as me with computers. And it was a really cool experience. So I went to Boise State University, got to my senior year at Boise State, and I'm watching Steve Jobs launch the App Store. And so called my parents, said, Mom, Dad, I'm dropping out of school. I'm going to do something in apps. I was a computer science major at the time, computer information systems, major at the time, but I was minoring in business. And so I knew that apps were just going to be the next big thing, or I was betting on that. Let's put it that way. So, dropped out of school, started a company called Homestack, and we built over 8,000 apps in the App Store for all the major real estate companies around the United States. And it was super, super fun. I found a mentor, an incredible guy in the real estate space, as well as my dad, who has been in real estate as well. And so really, really helped me out. And then 10 years into that company, we did very well. I wanted to do something bigger, something to give back, something for the kingdom. And I called my pastor, asked him how I could help. And the very next day, I ran into my co-founder, Steve, in Pray.com. And Steve and I linked up. He told me his story, which is incredible. And we started Pray.com together with our other co-founders, Mike Lynn and Ryan Beck, and raised a little bit under $37 million to build Pray.com. And so fast forward to today, we're at 152 million shares of the Pray.com app. We just crossed over 17 million downloads. Our podcast, which we launched last year, have hit over 120 million downloads now. And
incredible.
Just in the app alone, we've had 2.5 billion listening minutes. And this, that number, it's like super hard to comprehend, but I'm going to put it in another way that's even harder to comprehend. 1,600 years of content consumption have taken place inside the app. And so just to even think about that, for me, it's scary. It's crazy. So
wow. That's just staggering numbers, and it's incredible. I mean, just what a blessing to be able to do that. Like, but it started small, right? Like I confess, like, how long has this now been in operation? Like
so about 8 years now, October 22nd timeframe around 2016 is when we started. And, so it's been about 8 years, and it's been an exciting journey. You read all the books, right? And it says, do the unscalable things. We definitely did the unscalable things. Like we did everything you can think of. I held a sign in Santa Monica on the pier to get people to download the app. There was only 4 of us, and we were renting a broom closet. It literally was a closet. We had to move the yellow bucket thing with the mop in it out, everything. I mean, literally, we were in this closet. We're like, how do we get people to try the app? Well, by the way, we did 2 years of like research. So this was 2018, and we're on Santa Monica Pier, like holding up signs like need prayer, download pray.com. Right. And it was really fun. And then we started going to like these conferences, and then I started asking like small pastors if they'd let me share it with their church. And, fast forward to today, I just got asked to go speak at a 30,000 person church in Dallas. So
amazing.
And we don't do like those guerrilla tactics as much anymore, but
sure.
You start small, you start unscalable, but you don't hear those stories from a lot of startups, right? It's like, oh, overnight they were a success. It all worked out. It was great. No, like there's so many challenges and tough times, and you're pulling your hair out and you don't know how you're going to get it to work. And those constraints though create an environment of creativity that help you figure it out. So you just have to keep working on the problem.
Yeah. Well, and it's like every overnight success takes about 6 years to develop, right? Or something to that effect. I believe that's the phrase, or something like that.
But I mean, look at the founders of Airbnb. They were selling like Wheaties at the RNC and DNC, like just to fund their project. Who would have thought, like, you rent a room to a stranger or your car to a stranger, right? Like, so hard. Yeah.
And I think that kind of speaks on some level to like just the unusual nature of what you guys were trying to create. I mean, we don't typically think, oh, I'm going to rent out a room to a stranger. I also don't necessarily immediately go to, I need some help praying. I think I'm going to download an app. That's
right.
Like, so how did you kind of come up with this concept and then kind of develop a mission around that now is evolved into what it is today? I'm kind of curious, like, that's got to be a kind of a tricky proposition. So you started off definitely with this interest in technology. You met Steve Jobs, which is incredible, and you had these great experiences with Pixar and Homestack. How did that kind of feed into this in some level?
Yeah, so because Steve and I had started companies before, Steve Gattina, my co-founder, and I, we started companies before. So at nights, at my offices in Homestack, they were in the same city that Steve and I lived in. Ryan and Mike and Steve and I would get together, and I painted all of the walls in the office whiteboard paint. So we used it for Homestack, but at night we were coming in and developing what would be Pray.com. And, we had all the startup stuff. We had the like hoverboard and all the, silly stuff and cold brew coffee machine and everything. Um, and it was super, super fun and it was great. But we knew that, you know, creating an incredible culture of a company that we wanted to work at first, especially in the space that we were going to, was the very most important thing. So we actually started there. We started with the culture and we used that culture to do the research. And we used a process called the mom test. It's out there. You can Google it. There's PDFs. You can buy the book. But you know, the mom test is all about, if you tell your mom about an idea, she's going to say, honey, that's great. That's awesome. Right.
Yeah.
And people want to be people pleasers and they want to tell you that your idea is great. So, you know, as an entrepreneur, and you entrepreneurs have shiny object syndrome, right? I'm the biggest offender, you know. We go up and down the street and we get an idea. Well, you got to test those ideas. But if everybody says, oh, that sounds great, because they don't want to offend you, you go down the path of trying to do this idea, but it's never going to work. And you never got the real feedback that you actually needed. Right. So that's what the mom test enables you to do, is really ask questions in a certain type of way to get the real feedback from people on what the value that you're providing in the product idea, all that good stuff, the service, right? And so that's what we did 2 years of research on. We mom tested a bunch of people. We gathered data. We talked to thousands of pastors and priests and ministers and different people. We talked to congregants, people that just go to church. We went to church conferences like Calvary Church Conference and non-denominational church conferences, Baptist, Presbyterian, and we said, you know, what would you want out of something called Pray.com? And then we went through all of those motions to eventually arrive at where we arrived. And it's really interesting because of the research. Our seed deck is actually the same as our current deck now, with the mission of what we wanted to achieve. And that's not normal, right? That's not normal. But Steve and I had done it before, so we kind of knew, you know, some of the landmines and things in starting a company. And, you know, entrepreneurs, we all make the same mistakes. We get too far ahead of our skis. We hire our friends, you know, all sorts of stuff. And but we had learned some things. So this wasn't our first rodeo.
Yeah. So you do all this research and you're kind of figuring out the mission as you go along. What did you kind of end up on? And, you know, let's maybe kind of just state it more explicitly. Like, so Pray.com's mission is exactly what? Like internally, what are you guys really trying to do with this?
To create a world where everyone leaves a legacy of helping others is what we distilled it into.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Because that could be sharing the gospel with someone. That's helping them. It could be sharing a devotional in a time of need, right? It all comes back to mental and spiritual health at the end of the day. And so that's why we created the mission the way that we did. Because, you know, we could say it would be developing a better prayer life or a healthy habit of prayer, or, you know, but that's it. It's too small, right?
Yeah.
We wanted something that would be big. And, you know, a massive challenge is evangelizing and discipling at scale. We felt that fit both of those things. And so the mission is to create a world where everyone leaves a legacy of helping others.
I love it. And I think that, like, what I love about that too, in comparison to just like, we're trying to get you a better prayer life, is that, like, if I hear like, oh, I'm just trying to help you get a better prayer life. Well, that's one thing. And I might be kind of willing to just, you know, okay, that's fine. I don't need to go that far. But if what you're telling me is like, you want to leave this legacy and you want to be helping others in this particular way. Oh, by the way, in order to do that, this is what you need to be doing. This is how you build that. That's a more compelling vision, and it gets you all of it at once, which is great. I think it's really smart. And you know, so and that's a great legacy to leave, just at a meta level, to be thinking more deeply about these kinds of, like, how do you motivate people to do something good? Well, don't just don't just give them, don't just give them this one little message here. Yeah, let's give them something that is a bit more compelling, that invites them into this process of self discovery and self improvement along the way. Pretty
That's
huge,
right.
and I think that's what I've enjoyed just by from my excursion into Pray.com, really for the first time. I think it's really neat. So kudos to you guys for figuring that and going hard on it, if you will.
Thank you very much.
So when you think about like the way in which you've been building this business for some time, it's been 8 years now. It's got a history. I'm sure that you've got a lot of you encountered all sorts of not just unscalable things, but really difficult things that you had to overcome along the way. And yes, it's a faith-centered business. We all get that. But in what ways have you found that like actively practicing your faith has played a big role in your decision processes through the business, in how you've behaved in the business? Can you unpack some of those sorts of situations for us and what we can learn from that?
Yeah, no problem. So, if you are in the marketplace and you are a Christian business in the marketplace, it's not just margin, it's margin and mission, right? And then we also talk about it's not just profit, it's profit and purpose. So it's got to fit both stakeholders in that, we've got 4 stakeholders, right? Profit and purpose, margin and mission. It's got to align under those. So it has to align under profit and purpose, margin and mission. So when we think about features or we think about things that we're building inside the app or the customer, it always comes from that empathetic point of view of profit and purpose, margin and mission. And so we've overcome some incredible things. And we've seen that the app helps people not just in their mental health, but also their spiritual health. And it's counterintuitive because mental health can be a taboo topic to talk about as well as religion, right? So you talked about a couple apps in the very beginning of the podcast. It was Calm and Headspace. I think they're great. People use them. They're incredible. But what Christians we know is that it is counterintuitive, but we don't dwell on our problems. We give them to God, right? We give them up to our Creator, to our Lord and Savior, and we let God deal with our problems, and we ask God to intervene and help us in those problems. Where those apps would have you dwell and think about your problems, meditating on them to help you. When really, we know that in your prayer life and in giving your problems up to God, it actually, from some of the clinical trials and things that we've done and others have done, increases gray matter density in your brain and helps decrease the symptoms of mental health like anxiety and depression and some of these other things. So, when we're thinking about how our faith, my Christian walk, my walk with Jesus comes into the business, my co-founders, where their Christian faith and walk comes into the business, is in some of the ways that we develop the product and in how we build those user journeys, because everyone is on a different faith journey. So how do we help people decrease those symptoms of mental health, increase their spiritual life and their walk, right? And it's through some of these healthy habit building things that we built inside the app. And that is how we kind of think about every day in building new features, in iterating on current features. Everything is fighting for your focus. And we might as well pour our energy, our lives, and our time here onto something that's fighting for your focus, building a healthy habit, and increasing your walk with Jesus.
Yeah. I mean, that seems really crucial. And I appreciate you kind of explaining some of those differences as well in the way that others can kind of approach this. And so it's really interesting. What sorts of, let's talk a little bit about like some of those even feature sets or whatnot. And I'm just in a broad way, like what kinds of things have you introduced into this app stack, if you will, that are trying to do just that? Let's kind of give me some ideas about like what are you recommending? What's exciting coming up?
Yeah. So the way we think about it is in inputs and outputs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you were to go on the App Store and look at any other app in the App Store, you would look at their reviews, 1 star, 2 star, 5 star, all that good stuff. When you look at Pray.com's reviews, which we would call the outputs, you would see reviews like, I was going to commit suicide and I decided not to. I'm using this app with my kid who's in the hospital dying of leukemia. Or I just lost my spouse and the app is helping me reconnect with God when I was mad at him. Those are real reviews. Like there was a police officer in Ohio who wrote in and told us that he was going to kill himself until a friend of his sent him the app in the moment that he was going to do it. And those would be the outputs. So what are the features? What are the inputs that help us achieve some of those outputs? And it's not just us. We're just the vessel, right? Yeah. God has really made the conduit. Friend. Yeah, the conduit. Exactly. The connective tissue, right? So what are some of the features and how do we think about those things? Well, we started something called our daily devotional. It pops up in the app. It's the first thing you see every single day. There is a streak associated with that daily devotional. So our expectation is to prompt you to pray every morning and be able to listen to an incredible devotional that we've got amazing writers, voice actors, and actresses. We hired a 61-piece orchestra that creates sound beds and soundscapes in the app, right? And so what does that do? Well, from a scientific perspective, which people say don't mix science and religion, right?
Well, we don't listen to that.
We'll just do that, right? We'll just do that. So we actually hired one of the chief science officers from Oura Ring and a few other companies to come in and help us do some clinical trials. And wouldn't you know it, we got an overwhelmingly positive response when it comes to frequency. So if someone uses the app every single day, even if it's only for a minute or 2 minutes, they'll have outsized outcomes from using the app every single day, even though if it was just a couple minutes. So we built a feature. We had a premise that people needed to be reminded to pray every morning. We built the feature and then we showed them where they missed and where they hit. Then we went and we got our chief science officer to run clinical trials to see how it actually affects people from their physical bodies, which would make sense. But as Christians, we don't really think about, we are made in the image of God. So connecting with God, our creator, would help us heal our physical bodies, right? Not a lot of people think of it that way. And we saw the clinical trials. So we were able to prove it and get those trials published in scientific journals. And the feature works incredibly well for people. We then took it one step further. And at the end, you can share your devotional and streak with a family member or friend. So that police officer that day had a friend. That friend was probably prompted by God or somebody else who downloaded our app, read the daily devotional, prayed, listened to the app, and said, you know what? My friend, who's that police officer in Ohio, he probably needs this right now, and shared it with them in a text message. And God created that moment for that police officer to see it, who was going to kill himself. And he chose not to kill himself. Like, that's how we build features at Pray.com.
That's not an answer I expected, and it's a really good one. What a blessing that is to people. I want to, we're talking about this integration of technology, in this way that perhaps we don't always expect.
Yeah.
And I'm even before we started our recording here, I mentioned that we want to talk about this kind of like, how does the bringing in technology to our prayer life, our faith life in general, what are some of those, I think there's some resistance to that. So what are some of the positives and even maybe some negatives, and what do we need to watch out for? I am really curious to hear your perspective on this, because, I'm sure you've read folks like Neil Postman. I'm sure you've read or seeing other folks who talk about, oh, well, the more you try to bring screens into this, the worse it's going to be. And there's all sorts of Luddite arguments out there that are bad. But we also want to be careful that we're not too optimistic either, right? So what are some of the things that you've learned through this process and the things that you bring to bear to explain this to people and help people to understand the value that this can bring and why it's important, but what else can we, what should we be concerned about too? So I don't know. I'm kind of throwing a whole bunch of stuff out there at once, and I'm going to let you just go with it and see where you take it.
Yeah. Let me roll.
Yeah.
So, if we look at, let's look at movie theaters. Are people going to movie theaters more or less, right? And the answer is less, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the metric that big media uses for understanding how Christianity is working or thriving or not thriving in the United States is church attendance.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying we shouldn't go to church. I think we should go to church. But church attendance is going down. Yeah. And after COVID, it went really down.
Way down.
But it's been trending down for a decade. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a little bit more. Now, big media would say, oh, well, we're becoming less of a Christian nation. People are not going to church as much and all this good stuff or all this bad stuff, right? It sounds bad. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel, right? Technology can be used for good, because what I can tell you is the utilization of Christian apps and Christian media is up 52% over the last 24 months and is continuing to increase. So I used the movie theater example as a premise because people are watching more movies than ever before. They're just not going to the physical locations.
Mm-hmm.
People are consuming more Christian content and it's getting shared and utilized more than ever before. They may just not be going to the physical locations as often.
Mm-hmm.
And that might just be because technology is changing. We now have everything in our pocket, all that stuff that's going on. But all that to say, I think technology can be a great tool to increase our faith, to enable us to utilize it in moments when we can't go to church. As an example, people are using pray.com on average over 77 times per month, right? They're not going to church 77 times per month.
That is
but
true.
They're getting faith content. They're getting what they need in those moments. My business partner, Steve, came to Christ because of a friend of his who was a former Navy SEAL, gave him an audio sermon from a pastor. His business partner died in a plane crash. That's why he came to Christ. It was at 4 p.m. on a Friday. Church was not open or in service.
Okay.
In that moment, he got something from a friend and that brought him to Christ. So technology can be used for good in a massive way. And that's what we're trying to do at pray.com is take technology back for the kingdom, utilize it, just like when the Gutenberg press was invented, right? We went from word of mouth to parchment paper and stone tablets, right?
That's
and then
technology. Yeah.
Communication is changing. Technology is changing. We need to utilize it for good. Otherwise, we already know there's a ton of people that are going to utilize it for bad, right?
Yeah.
So
that's the easy. Yeah. Well, and do you think that there's, I agree. Like that's a great exposition on like where we can go to increase our faith using technology. This is important in the same way. Like it's the same level of stuff as Gutenberg press, an audio sermon recording. We used to pass around. I mean, we were both kids in the 90s. We remember like the sermon tapes that got passed around and things like that. I mean, that used to be a thing. I used to duplicate sermon tapes, using a tape duplicator.
The Sony Walkman, right?
Yeah. And now we do the same. We do the same thing. We just put it up as a podcast, and now it goes out to 1,000 people instead of me spending 1,000 minutes just trying to duplicate a tape. So like these things are super important, right?
I mean, not even just a podcast, but like the availability of different geographies, right?
Oh yeah.
We see people in North Korea using Pray.com.
Oh,
That
that's
wasn't
incredible. Yeah.
with tapes and
Ooh.
CDs.
Mhm.
Even podcasts get blocked in North Korea, but just because of the way that we've built the app and its availability, people are able to use it. It's
Oh, that's
crazy.
fantastic. Oh man, if we had time, I would like unpack that even more because that sounds crazy. And what a light into the darkness there. That's incredible.
Yeah.
But are there also, are there any concerns that you have, or what would you encourage people like with regards to, we ought not, we can't neglect the church though. We know that. So like where does the rubber meet the road here? How do we lever this particular technology to drive people into the embodied nature of the church itself? And it's like that's I guess where I'm kind of going with this. It's like, what do you see as the lever point there that you can kind of turn a bit?
Yeah, we view the sharing of the app and the utilization of the app as the top of funnel to drive people into physical locations.
Mm-hmm.
So before, when you were in church in the late 90s, right? Late 90s, early 2000s, even up to like 2005, right? Pastor would say, go to our website, check out the schedule, right? Get the calendar of events. Recently it's check out our church app, right? There's all these white label app makers out there that, and only the people in the congregation are typically like 15, 20% of the congregation downloads the church app, and maybe they open it once a year, right?
Yeah.
But really nothing has been built to drive people who are curious about their faith or questioning things or want to know more about God into those physical locations. And so that's really where the rubber meets the road for us. We have pastors and churches on Pray.com uploading content because it has flipped now. People don't go to the church and drive around and just look at the churches in their area. They're going online. They're listening to sermons. They're looking at photos. They're looking at videos. They want to know if this is a place where they could see themselves. Then they go pick out the 2 or 3 in that 15, 20-minute drive radius, and they're going to those churches.
Interesting. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, it's a different model, that's for sure. But it's a reality that we have to deal with now.
Yep.
So it's encouraging that you guys are like obviously data driven and kind of figuring out this is how people are actually using it and what we can do to serve the church more broadly with that data.
The team is sick of hearing me saying, God, we trust, all others bring data. So
that's good though. Yeah, I've definitely heard that before too. It's a trust but verify sort of thing, right?
Right. That's right.
Yeah, very good. Well, so I think that this kind of drives at the next level of potential clarifications or things that you want people to understand about Pray.com and what sorts of what is the meaning of the service that you guys are bringing forward. Do you find that folks sometimes have just major misconceptions about Pray.com, and what do you do to try and help alleviate concerns that you hear? I mean, even I'm bringing stuff forward that I'm sort of dancing around the potential of calling it a concern, but that's kind of what it is, right? So, what do you how do you teach them and bring them along that path toward realizing that there's great value in leveraging this kind of service?
Yeah, it's all through our onboarding process within the app. So we are the #1 app for daily prayer and faith-based content. We have over 2 million pieces of content, 5,500 originals that we've created at Pray.com with, award-winning voice actors and actresses, 61-piece orchestra. We've done the Bible in 3 different versions. We scripted the Bible as a complete audio show where you can hear all your favorite Bible stories come to life. We have daily devotionals, guided prayers, some of the top 100 pastors in America that are providing content to the platform. So no matter what you're going through in your life, if you want to increase a healthy habit of prayer, if you want to decrease mental health symptoms that you're having, if you want to learn more about the Bible, if you want to fall asleep to our Bible bedtime stories to fall asleep at night, which people absolutely love.
I need to try. I do want to try that very badly.
You gotta try it. Tell me, it's set to a specific tone and hertz level to help you fall asleep. It's really, really cool, and people swear by it. In fact, I was talking to the president of Dallas Theological Seminary, and he was like, "Matt, because he actually, we got in a car together. We ended up sharing a lift, and I didn't know who he was. He didn't know who I was.
Oh, wow."
And I just said, "Yeah, hey, my name's Matt Potter. I started this app, Pray.com." I said, "Pray.com?" He's like, "I use that every night to fall asleep." And I was like, "Really?" I was like, "Wow." Like, I was excited because I thought he might have some theological feedback,
No, I just love it.
He loved it. And it made me so happy because, we try to make the app interdenominational. I use that term specifically because it's not non-denominational. That's a thing, right? We want to make it so that, if you're Baptist or Southern Baptist or Presbyterian or non-denominational, that you would still love the content. It would help you in your journey, in your faith journey, right? And so those are some of the things that you can get in Pray.com. We've also done some really cool content series with Dr. Phil, who's a super strong Christian. Drew Brees, he was the former New Orleans Saints quarterback. Right. He has a remarkable story. And he is one of the best people that I've listened to on leadership, and Christian leadership at that, especially, in a high adrenaline sport like football. So we've partnered with some of these different celebrities, if you will, to create some of these content series. And they're a cinematic audio experience. And it's really cool to hear. So people absolutely love the app, and that's what they come to us for.
Excellent. So I guess what you're kind of saying is that you might have some, question about its efficacy or something to that effect, but come and experience it. Come and see, if you will. Yep. And I think that's a very appropriate sort of response. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Not everything's going to be for everybody, and that's fine. But the core is there, and I think that's what it needs to be remembered. Is that we're all. I mean, even over the course of your story, you even talked in a sense about how much you were experimenting with what is good for people, and then trying to deliver data to suggest okay, this actually is, and you probably have other stories that we haven't talked about this isn't. So we killed that, or things like that, right? So
that's actually, Norman, that is the hardest thing to do.
Oh yeah,
is killing things that you thought would work, right? Because you have a big engineering team. At least we have a big engineering team. You build something, it takes 6 months, you roll it out, and it doesn't work, and you got to go back and tell all of those people they built something that we're going to just remove. Right?
Can it? Yeah. I felt that. I will. After the show, I'll tell you some of my own stories as a fellow engineer. I'll give you one or something like that. But
love it.
Love it. Well, Matthew, I really do appreciate everything you've been telling us here. I think what you got going is super interesting, and I wasn't a user before really hearing about you guys and what was going on and being introduced to you. So I'm getting into it. I think it's amazing. And I would encourage people to check it out. And if it works for you, keep using it. But before we go, I always like to ask one question of all our guests on Faith Ventures podcast. And that's that, you've had this just unusual career journey. Everybody has got a kind of a weird career journey. And there's always something that we can learn from each other from these. So I like to call this my Tim Ferriss billboard question sometimes. But imagine you could just go back in time and give your younger self some advice about work and business and integrating your faith within that. If you were especially talking to some of our younger listeners and whatnot, what sort of thing would you want them to walk away from this discussion really having centered upon and learning from?
I would say align your personal goals in life direction with God. And if you do that and you keep God first in your life, I will not guarantee that you will be successful. but it's a guarantee that you will live the best life if you keep God 1st, right? And you follow the Bible in the direction that God puts you in. Because I do believe from all the things along the way, actually, I don't believe, I know that I am doing God's purpose for my life. And from all the things that have happened to me along the way. So I would just say keeping God first is the best advice if I was going to give advice, which I don't feel like I can give advice to anybody because I've had such a original journey through this. But you know what? Just keeping God first always has worked for me in my journey. And Norman, one of the things, you said you encourage people to check out the app. I really appreciate that. But for all of you that listen to the very end right now, I'm going to give you the entire app for free. So if you go to pray.com/Matt, MATT, you will get the entire app. It's usually around $120 a year for free. Wow. So just for listening to the Faith Ventures podcast.
Amazing.
Again, you just go to pray.com/Matt. You'll get the entire app for free. No credit card needed. Just put your email in.
Let's go.
You get the whole app. So
wow. Well, thank you for your generosity there, Matt. That's absolutely terrific. And I know that people will be blessed by it, and I hope that they will continue to bless other people through just in the same way that a policeman in Ohio receives the app, uses it, and decides to spare his own life from that. There's hardly anything better than seeing and experiencing great stories like that, and that's what this is all about. Faith Ventures podcast is about telling these great stories. So thank you for sharing these stories with us. And thank you for being such a creative person in this endeavor. We appreciate it. We appreciate you sharing it with us. Everybody has heard where they can get in contact with pray.com, obviously. If they want to follow you on, say, Twitter or somewhere else, or you have any other suggestions if they want to check you out elsewhere?
I'm only on LinkedIn. So if you go to LinkedIn and you type in Matthew Potter, you'll find me. But, follow us. We're at Pray on X, Twitter, right? On Instagram, on Facebook, and on TikTok. We're just at PRAY. So.
Amazing. Well, once again, Matthew, thank you so much for joining us on the Faith Ventures podcast and for all that you're doing for the kingdom. And so for everybody listening, we hope you've enjoyed this podcast, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.